As we said in the last lecture, stewardship involves stewardship over everything that we have any influence on. And so one of the prime areas of stewardship that I want to talk about in this lecture is stewardship of the environment. And you see, the Bible has a lot to say about the environment. And it is a primary source of our stewardship, because if the environment goes bad, then human life goes bad. Now, we start at the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God is the creator of everything. But there's a connection between creation and ownership. The Bible says that God owns everything as well. I mean, in the Psalms, it talks about God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. That does not mean that there is hill number 1001 that he does not own. No, it means everything is his. And so everything in the world actually reflects God and his glory. And we need to understand, because God created the entire world and owns it, that means everything has value because ultimately it has been created by God. When God, at the end of creation week, he looked at what he had created and saw that it was very good. Further, in the covenant with Noah, in Genesis 8 and 9, he entered into a covenant, basically, with the earth, that seed time, harvest, winter, summer, the earth will continue to exist until Christ comes again. So I know a lot of people are afraid that, well, either a meteor will strike the earth and destroy it, or there will be an atomic war and the earth will be destroyed. Well, meteors may strike the earth. They have in the past. But it will not completely destroy the earth if that happens. Yes, there may be nuclear war, and millions, maybe even billions of people could be killed, or a pandemic, all kinds of things. But the fact remains is that the earth and people will continue to exist until Christ comes again. God, that's what the import of the covenant with Noah says. The Bible indicates also that God holds the world together and actively sustains it and its creatures. God has a plan for the world, and everything that happens is part of his overall plan that will be consummated when Christ comes again. And in fact, when Christ comes again, the entire world is going to be renewed. Now, in Romans 1, it indicates that creation reveals God. In Psalm 19, it talks about how the heavens declare the glory of God. Now, we need to think about the implications of these things for our lives. We talked earlier, when we were defining stewardship, we talked about the fact that in Genesis 1 and in Genesis 2, God gave human beings the authority to fill the earth and to subdue it. And he said in Genesis 2, verse 15, you are to cultivate and keep the garden. Now, when we talked about that, we talked about how subduing is the use of controlled, thoughtful force. But cultivating, what is cultivating? I mean, if you have a shamba or a farm or even a garden, you know what cultivating involves. It means clearing the land, getting rid of the weeds and the rocks, sowing good seed, making sure that they're watered, and so on and so forth. Because cultivating basically is acting so that things of value come up where there were no things of value. I mean, if you have vacant land that's not cultivated, you're not growing maize or beans or anything like that, but you start planting and cultivating crops. The land is worth so much more now. So basically, cultivating is to create value and improve things, create value where there was no or little value. But as you improve things, you see you're creating value, which is a positive thing for human beings. And we also were to keep, Adam was told to keep the garden. So we cultivate, and to keep, again, means to take care of it. And this, again, is important because how we manage the environment will positively or negatively affect both the present generation of people and future generations of people who bear God's image. And in Isaiah 66, verse 1, Matthew 5, verse 35, and Acts 7, verse 49, the earth is called God's footstool. And so if you think about it, if you're invited to somebody's house for dinner, let us say, you go and you see that they have a footstool or a chair. You just don't kick it or take your marker or a knife and start defacing it. Because why? Because it's his. You don't do that to your own things. And yet, how do we treat God's footstool, God's earth? This involves our stewardship. You see, the fact of the matter is that you look at the pollution, litter. I mean, I've been to Africa enough to know that so many villages and cities are absolutely filthy. People throw bottles and papers and stuff out of buses and cars. I mean, they're just piles, mounds of trash. You wouldn't do that in your own home, and you wouldn't do that in somebody else's home. But we're doing it to God's home. He owns it. The environment is his. And you think about this. When we treat the environment poorly, it's not just that we're treating the environment poorly. What we're doing is actually showing what we really think of God. Since this is his home, he created it. He owns it. It's called his footstool. And if we trash it, it says, yes, what we think of his footstool. But more than that, it shows what we think of him. Because if you go to somebody's house and you deface their things, their house, their footstool, their chair, whatever, yes, it's showing what you think of that footstool or chair. But more fundamentally, it shows what you think of the person, you see. And so it's the same with our relationship with God. The fact is, Christians should be the people who take the best care of the environment. Why? Because it's God's. And we say we love God. Well, you see, unfortunately, most of the people who, I think, who are concerned about the environment are not Christians. And why are they concerned about the environment? Because the earth is all they have. And so they're concerned that the earth is taken care of. Well, yes, the earth is our home. But it seems to me we have a much greater motive to take care of the earth because we know and we love the one who created the earth and who owns it. And it should be our love for God that should be our primary motive for how we take care of God's things. Now, I mentioned that we have been given the commission back in Genesis 1 to take care of, to cultivate, to keep the earth. But, when you look at, I remember being once in a village in Uganda, and between the guest house where we were staying and the church where we were having a conference, we had to pass this, on the path right by the path, there was this huge pile of trash. One day I saw there was a dead dog there. It's not just unsightly and smells bad, but things like that are a breeding ground for mosquitoes, flies, vermin, and other disease-carrying agents. You see, and this is true all over East Africa, except in Rwanda. In Rwanda, it's the cleanest country in East Africa and probably the cleanest country in all of Africa. Why? Because the government said, if you throw trash on the ground and the police sees you, they will arrest you and take you to jail. Now, why did the government step in to do that? They had to step in because the church was not doing its job. We've heard that phrase, the earth is God's footstool, but it seems to me, in most churches, we don't think about the implications. Well, if the earth is God's footstool, then clearly an implication is you take care of the earth because it's God's, okay? The church does not teach this, and we see the results. Trash, filth, everywhere. You see, the church could provide a valuable mission by educating their people about taking care of the environment and by actually going out into their villages and communities and cleaning things up. It wouldn't take much. This would show, if churches started doing this, people would say, who are you? Why are you doing this? That gives you the opportunity to witness and say, we are the people of this particular church. This is our home, just like it's your home. But ultimately, God owns it. We love God, and we love this village. And we want you to have a better quality of life. To do this, you'd be cleaning up the environment, you'd have the opportunity to witness, and it would be showing that the church actually cares about people, actually cares about things, and actually cares about the environment. So cleaning up the trash, not polluting the waters, the rivers, and the lakes, not overfishing the lakes. And there's another form of pollution. I mean, these are simple things, but they have spiritual importance because ultimately they show what we think of God. And since people are affected by this, they show what we think of God's people who bear his image. And how we treat God's people ultimately, again, shows what we think of God. There's another form of pollution. I was in a village in, I believe it was Uganda, several years ago. Basically just one main road. But early in the morning, there was a small shop. I can't remember if it was a shop or maybe a barber shop. But early in the morning, the owner would put out these great big speakers and start blasting noise and music. Why? I mean, that I call noise pollution. Turn down the volume, for crying out loud. A lot of churches might be very small churches, and yet so many of them have these large sound systems. They turn up the volume. I know a pastor I knew in Uganda who the church had this large sound system. It ended up affecting his hearing in one of his ears, and he had to spend several hundreds of thousands of Uganda shillings with a doctor to have his hearing repaired. That's not necessary, and it's not good. The Bible says that in 1 Corinthians 2, we all have the mind of Christ. The issue is, are we going to use the mind of Christ? Because if we act thoughtfully, if we think about what we're doing with the environment, it should change how we act. And for example, we should give rest to the land, rotate our crops, properly irrigate, which helps to conserve the land. One of the things we can do, and now I know Christian individually and churches, plant trees or bushes. Most churches have a compound, but And some churches have a lot of land, but they're not doing anything with it. I mean, think about this. If you planted um, uh, mango trees, for example, uh, in a few years, when they grow up, you're going to have lots of mangoes, which you can sell, or which you can give to the poor, give to your people, or plant things like eucalyptus trees. A pastor I knew in western Kenya, he had some land and decided that he would start planting eucalyptus trees. They take, I think, 7 or 8 years to mature, but then a fully grown eucalyptus tree was worth approximately 10,000 Kenya shillings. Um, Construction companies and others buy these for use in when they're putting up buildings. This pastor was sitting on millions of shillings of renewable money, which he hadn't been taking advantage of. Planting trees also increases the oxygen and beautifies things. I know a church in Burundi. They started helping improving their compound by planting trees and bushes. It's taking care of the environment. It looks better. People would be drawn to the church because the church is saying essentially, we care. We want to look good, and we want to draw people in. We want to show people that we care about them. Now, there's I read an account of a guy who took a trip by various means from Cairo down to Cape Town. And he reported that when he was somewhere in the middle of Tanzania, he was in a little village, and in the middle of the afternoon, it was very hot. There was one mango tree in that village, and he saw about maybe 20 or so people huddled under that mango tree to be in the shade instead of in the sun. They'd probably been doing that for years. The thought occurred to this guy, where are all the other mango trees? From that one tree, they could get the seeds and plant multiple mango trees. But they never thought about this, you see. And so they all just cower under the one mango tree instead of improving their life, planting more trees. Again, this seems very obvious to me, but that's taking care of the environment, because when we take care of the environment, we're also taking care of human life. Other things in terms of taking care of the environment. The intelligently improving roads. Now, I've been through East Africa enough that I know that some villages, they're caked with dust because for years, as roads have been worked on, this adversely affects people's health. It might be possible if the government, started thinking intelligently. Number one, have dual carriageways, or the highways have 2 lanes each way instead of just one, because the problem is you get behind a lorry and it might be only going 15 kilometers per hour if it's going uphill. You have these long lines of cars. And so to intelligently improve roads would increase the speed, increase the efficiency, help trade, maybe do bypasses around villages instead of having all of the vehicles go right through the middle of a village. There's all kinds of things we could think of, it seems to me, to intelligently improve our environment. Stewardship, I think, also should strive for beauty. I mean, Jesus said, when he looked at the lilies of the field, he said, Solomon in all of his glory did not clothe himself like one of these lilies. See, beauty is an important thing. And as We, increase natural beauty by planting trees, bushes, hedges, and flowers, or even by the roads. We're preserving the beauty of the area. Plants increase the oxygen supply, and they cut down on the dust and the noise of the motorways. Planting flower and fruit trees, increases the beauty, but provides school children and the public with fruits that are good for the body and shade. And I know one church in Tanzania. They have started. They're located next to a school, and so on the church property, they have started planting various kinds of edible substances. I think some kind of lettuce and some other things, which then can help the children. It's making good use of the land and improving the quality of life. They could sell it, and maybe they sell, or maybe they give it away. But these are things that we can do to improve the quality of life, show our love for God, and show our love for God's people. If we are good stewards of the environment, life will be better. But again, when we hear statements like the earth is God's footstool, one of the things we need to do is think, what are the implications, since the earth is owned by God, what are the implications for how we live our lives? Well, take care of the environment, and that way you'll be showing that you're honoring God. You love Him, and you're expressing that love in practical ways that will help maintain a good earth, not only for this generation, but for generations to come.